Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is True Crime Tuesday yet again, and today we will be talking about the girl who spent 44 days in hell under the hands of a boy that she rejected. Today we will be talking about the case of Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta was born on November 22nd, 1971 in Misato, Japan. She was a well-liked girl and was actually quite popular in school. According to her parents, she was a perfect child. She had good grades, always obeyed them, and was overall just a nice girl. She was someone whom everybody thought had a bright future ahead of her. However, everything changed on the night of November 25th, 1988. Just 3 days after her 17th birthday, Junko Furuta was attacked by a random boy as she was on her way home from her part-time job. Now, Junko was on her bike, just wanting to go home after a long day at school and work, when a random boy around her age decided to suddenly kick her off her bike before quickly fleeing the scene, which is very weird. Now, luckily, another boy was there. He witnessed everything and he decided to help Junko. It was a boy from Junko's school named Hiroshi Miyano, and since this was someone that Junko was fairly familiar with, she agreed when he offered to walk her home. Junko started to feel at ease because she was with someone that she knew. And she got so carried away with their conversation that she didn't even realize that he had actually led her to an abandoned warehouse. Now, once they arrived in this abandoned warehouse, Hiroshi's demeanor completely changed. From the friendly boy that helped Junko out, he started yelling at her, telling her to shut up and just comply with whatever it is that he asked her to do, threatening her along the way, saying that he had connections to the Japanese mafia or the Yakuza. Hiroshi led Junko inside of this abandoned warehouse, and that's when he started to sexually assault her. Once he was finished, he then took her to a motel and did the same thing again 2 times more. And this is when Junko remembered who Hiroshi really was and why he seemed so familiar to her, aside from the fact that they went to the same school. Months prior to this, Hiroshi had actually asked Junko out, but wanting to focus on her studies, Junko politely declined. Now, instead of just accepting this, just like what normal people would do, Hiroshi started to develop a dangerous level of hatred towards Junko, and he was so embarrassed that he started to plot his revenge. That same night, Hiroshi called 3 of his friends, Shinji Minato, Joe Ogura, and Yasushi Watanabe. He took Junko to a nearby park to meet up with them, and from there they then went to Hiroshi's house, which he shared with his parents. Upon meeting Hiroshi's friends, Junko recognized one of the boys, Shinji. She then realized that this was actually the boy who kicked her off her bike earlier, now knowing that this was all a plan. They had Junko act as one of the boys' girlfriends just in case his parents asked. However, they never really questioned anything because at this point, nothing seemed suspicious. Now, the next day, since Junko didn't show up after finishing her shift at her part-time job, her parents, of course, filed a missing persons case, and a manhunt for the 17-year-old Junko Furuta began. However, not long after it started, the search for Junko was actually called off because the 4 boys forced her to ring her parents and tell them that it was her choice to run away and that she was happy this way, she didn't want to be found, and that she was staying with a friend. So yes, Junko Furuta was sadly forced to call off her own search party. She was made to reassure her parents that she would be fine, and that's why they decided to just leave it and let her be. Now, They, of course, had no idea that this would be the last time that anyone would ever hear from Junko Furuta ever again. For 44 days, she was held hostage by Hiroshi and his friends. She was subject to different types of abuse and torture in what seemed like a house of horrors. Now, Hiroshi's parents, as I've mentioned, did live with him. However, they never said nor did anything because they were also scared of their own son because they were aware that he did have connections to the Japanese mafia and he's not afraid to use it even on them. For a month and a half, these four boys took turns in raping and assaulting poor Junko, who at the very beginning of her captivity had already lost hope, knowing that nobody was looking for her and not a single soul was coming to rescue her. Now, if you are sensitive to these kinds of things, I would suggest you to skip to this timeline instead because now I will be detailing everything that happened to Junko. Now, aside from being sexually assaulted, Junko Furuta was also beaten up by these four boys on a daily basis. They would kick her and use her as a human punching bag. Also, they would have her lay on the concrete floor and they would drop heavy items such as dumbbells or weights on her stomach. And not only that, the four boys would also jump on Junko's head repeatedly. They would also burn her with cigarettes, lighters, and candle wax. And aside from this, she was also starved and was forced to eat her own feces and drink her own urine. It is believed that during the 44 days, Junko was raped around 400 times in total, which is so much. And aside from this, she was also forced to perform various sexual activities or sexual acts for the boys and in front of the boys. She was also sodomized with different types of toys and random items or foreign objects, that anything that they could think of. And one time the boys even inserted lit fireworks inside of Junko. So imagine the damage that this caused her organs or her insides. Now, aside from sexually assaulting her multiple times a day on a daily basis, the boys also mutilated parts of her face as well as her genitals. At one point, one of her nipples was completely torn away from the rest of her body. It was that bad. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the four boys then started to invite more friends over to do the same thing to Junko. These two other boys were named Koichi and Tatsuya. Now, Tatsuya enjoyed this rape and torture just as much as the four other boys did. However, Koichi didn't really want to do this and was forced to do it, so he eventually did. And of course, he was also scared because he knew of Hiroshi's Yakuza connection. And he was coerced in doing the same thing to her, but he actually felt really guilty afterwards. And that night, he confided with his older brother about everything. He told his older brother how there was this girl that was being held captive by Hiroshi in his own home. Koichi's older brother then told their parents, which wasted no time in telling the police. Now, two officers then went to Hiroshi's house the next day to check if the claims were true. However, Hiroshi's parents denied everything, saying that there was no girl at their home, and they even offered for the police to come inside and check. And they didn't do that because according to the police, it was enough evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Minato. Anyway, so the parents offered for the police to come in and check. However, the police declined, saying that the fact that they invited them to come inside, that was enough evidence that would say that the claims were not true. And so the police left, and Junko Furuta's nightmare continued. At some point during her captivity, the boys doused her legs in lighter fluid before setting it on fire. She was also forced to sleep outside in the balcony during the Japanese winter. Every single day, Junko Furuta would reportedly beg the boys to just end everything already and to just kill her. Now, she was in so much pain already, and her injuries got so bad that she couldn't control her own body anymore. She started to urinate and do her business on the spot because she wasn't able to stand up and go to the bathroom anymore. The repeated beatings and burnings left her face and body so disfigured that towards the end of her captivity, Junko was barely recognizable. On the 44th day, one of the boys challenged Junko to a mahjong game, and she won. This infuriated the boys even more because I don't know if you've noticed, but these boys don't take rejection and losing very lightly. So Junko winning the mahjong game made the boys very angry, and this resulted to them punishing her. And of course, as usual, they beat Junko up. And from what I know, this physical assault lasted from 2 to 3 hours. And then Junko then started convulsing. She fell to the ground, and this is when the boys decided to drench her entire face and body with lighter fluid once again before setting her on fire. Now, while she was on fire, the boys didn't stop there. They started to drop heavy items such as weights on her body and her head once again. And then, of course, Junko eventually stopped responding. On January 4th, 1989, 17-year-old Junko Furuta succumbed to her injuries. Now, at first, the boys thought she was just unconscious because this would usually happen when they beat her up. She would usually pass out after a couple of hours. But once they realized that she was actually dead because she hadn't moved an inch in 24 hours, the boys realized that they had to get rid of her body. So Hiroshi asked his older brother for help. Now, the 4 boys, including Hiroshi's brother, they wrapped Junko's body up in several layers of blankets. They then stuffed her inside a gym bag or a large duffel bag before putting her body inside a 55-gallon drum, which they filled with fresh concrete. Now, at first, the boys thought that they were going to get away with the murder. However, they made another mistake even before Junko passed. Now, of course, since these 4 boys were torturing Junko in different ways during these 44 days, at some point, they started to not be physically attracted to her anymore as she was now disfigured. She was covered in wounds. She smelled bad because they made her eat her own feces and drink her own urine. Aside from that, a lot of her injuries had pus and dried blood on it. Now, when this happened, when they were no longer physically attracted to Junko, these boys decided to abduct another teenage girl and gang rape her. However, not wanting to deal with another hostage and thinking that she'd be too scared to turn them in anyway, the 4 boys let this 19-year-old girl go. And little did they know that she would remember who they were, all of them, and that she would actually muster up the courage to go ahead and report everything to the police. On January 23rd, 1989, Hiroshi and Joe were arrested for rape charges against this 19-year-old girl. They were questioned separately, and this is when Hiroshi, the mastermind himself, broke down in tears and started to confess about everything, including the torture and murder of Junko Furuta. Now, this of course shocked the police as they had no idea that Junko was dead. Just like Junko's parents, the authorities thought that she had just run away and was staying with a friend. Nobody had any idea that up until now, Junko was held captive and was being tortured by these evil boys. Hiroshi then told the police where they dumped poor Junko's body, and the next day her disfigured remains were retrieved. She was so disfigured that she couldn't be physically identified, and the only way that they were able to identify her was through her fingerprints. The two other boys, Yasushi and Shinji, were also arrested along with Hiroshi's older brother who helped them dispose of Junko's body. All four boys took a plea bargain and pled guilty to committing bodily injury resulting to death instead of murder. In July 1990, a year and a half after Junko passed away, Hiroshi was sentenced to 17 years in prison, which in my opinion is not enough for the things that he did to this poor girl. But in Hiroshi's mind, that punishment was too much. So he decided to appeal this sentence, but instead got an extra 3 years in prison. So in total, he was sentenced to 20 years. His parents were also asked to pay Junko's family a compensation of $400,000, and this resulted to them selling their house. And of course, a lot of people are very disappointed and even angry towards Hiroshi's parents because they never said or did anything. But of course, they were also scared of their child, which only tells us how dangerous Hiroshi really was, and that his connections to the Yakuza are quite strong. Shinji Minato was sentenced to 9 years. He now goes by a different name and has never been employed after his release. It is said that he lives with his mother because he can't really support himself. Yasushi Watanabe was then sentenced to 7 years. Now, Joe Ogura, who now goes by the name Joe Kamisaku, spent 8 years in a juvenile prison. But just 5 years after he was released, he was re-arrested for assaulting a man and was put in prison for another 7 years. And because of this, Joe Ogura's mother actually vandalized Junko Furuta's grave, saying that she did so because Junko Furuta ruined her son's life. Now, all four boys are now free men living normal lives, and they are all in their early 50s, and as far as I know, none of them re-offended aside from Joe. And yes, in my opinion, the sentencing was totally unfair, but all the boys were under 18 years old. They were the same age as Junko. They were all 17 years old. However, with the brutality and the gruesomeness of this whole thing, I don't think they deserve to be treated as juveniles at all. However, what's done is done. They are now in their 50s, and hopefully none of the 3 out of 4 boys would ever reoffend again. It's just so sad because Junko Furuta definitely had a bright future ahead of her. She was a very smart and kind girl, and she was loved by everyone around her. And I know I keep on saying this towards the end of every True Crime Tuesday video, but Junko definitely did not deserve what happened to her, and those boys deserved more time in prison, in my personal opinion. As I've said in one of my previous videos, that for me, it doesn't really matter how young you are, as long as you did something this evil. You don't really have the essence of a child, so you should be tried as an adult. Anyway, this is where I'll end today's video. Thank you so much for listening to Junko Furuta's story. I hope you guys found that interesting. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you haven't. All of my social media handles will be listed down below, so go ahead and check that out if you want. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all on my next video.